Welcome to Intuitive Writer, the podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the intersection of creativity and spirituality. I'm your host, fiction author Camille Picott. Before we launch into this week's episode, I'm going to give you a brief writing date. And for those of you that are on the YouTube channel, you can see the cover of my latest book. It is Zombiness Invasion, Book 3, and the title is Scattered. This just came out on April 22nd, so it is hot off the press on the shelves. You can get it at Amazon. It's forthcoming on Audible. The voice actor actually started recording over the weekend, and it's also available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you are a member of Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. And I have to tell you how much I loved writing this book. The characters were just amazing. We have a coming out story for a transgender teenage boy. We have a grandma that finds redemption for a very sad thing that happened to her at the end of World War II in Italy. We have a teenage boy who gets captured by the KGB and is tortured pretty terribly for a couple of chapters. That was really hard to write. I've mentioned this before in some old episodes. It was quite a doozy to have to write. And then we even have a beautiful, full-figured teenage girl who discovers how strong and athletic she is in the middle of the zombie apocalypse. So there's so many characters in this story, and I feel them tingling right now around me in my body. There's so many amazing characters in this book. So I do hope that maybe you will check out the series, tell all your friends about it, and if you read it, I would very much appreciate it if you left an honest review. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Intuitive Writer podcast. I am your host, Camille, and normally this is the point when I would say I'm your host, Camille Chan, but you probably noticed there was a slight change to the intro. And I went ahead and I changed the name associated with the podcast to Camille Picott. Camille Picott is my real name. It's the name that all of my books are published under. And I did this because in the beginning, when I first started this podcast, I didn't think that any of my zombie readers would be interested in my podcast. And likewise, I didn't think any of my listeners to the show would necessarily be interested in my zombie books. And what I'm finding is that's just not the case. There's definitely some cross-pollination between the two. And the other thing that I struggled with when I first launched this podcast is I had some difficulty reconciling these two very different parts of myself. I have this part of me that is deeply spiritual, deeply connected to the earth, to the universe, to my creativity. But I also have this really crazy side of me that writes about zombies and uses a lot of swear words and cracks dirty jokes. So I had a hard time reconciling these very different, almost conflicting aspects of myself. And I realized that by dividing them so strongly in my creative work that I was really just keeping myself fragmented. And what I really needed to do was just stand in front of everybody as a whole person. And this is just one really big part of me. And if you want to see the other part of me, hop over to my author YouTube channel and you'll see the other part of me, or read my books, whatever. So anyway, that is why I decided to change the name from Camille Chan to Camille Picott. And you probably also noticed that I changed the intro. It's now very short, and I talked about the Intuitive Writer show being about the intersection of creativity and spirituality. For the past few months, I have very much been feeling the energy of this show shift and expand around me, and I didn't have much clarity around it. And I think the biggest reason is because my newest book, Jesus Christ Zombie Killer, which I did finish, by the way, it took me 45 days, came in at just about 90,000 words. It was quite a ride, but anyway, we've talked about that before. That book required so much space to bring in that I just didn't have room for anything else. And now that I've finished the first draft and I'm working through the edits, I'm probably about 2/3 through editing the first draft. And so the energy is tapering off just a little. It's still pretty intense, but it's tapering off just enough that the podcast has a little bit of room to maneuver, and I could feel it starting to slide in. And so I asked it the other day. I said, hey, I know there's a shift and an expansion happening because I can feel it, but I don't have clarity. So can you please explain it? Can you please show me where I'm supposed to take this show? And it was like within less than a day, the answer came very clearly. And the words that came to me were the intersection of creativity and spirituality. So of course, now that's my intro because that's what Spirit gave me. And so that is really going to be the focus of this show going forward. So I wanted to dive into this concept of there being an intersection between creativity and spirituality. And I want to dive into it, dissect it, and explain what it means to me and potentially what it can mean to you as well. The shape of this show so far has been very heavily skewed towards writing. And yes, there is a spiritual component. There's spirituality sprinkled in. A lot of the techniques that I talk about are part of a spiritual practice. But what I realized when I channeled through this new direction for the podcast, this intersection of spirituality and creativity, I realized that I was actually only expressing half of the equation, that I really, really was leaning very heavily and skewing it toward the writing part, and that I wasn't addressing the spirituality part. I was actually just scratching the surface. There's so much on the spiritual side of things that happen behind the scenes that I just haven't shared. And I think, I do share a lot. So when I say there's a ton that I haven't shared, maybe you can imagine how much there actually is going on behind the scenes. But for me, creativity is a spiritual practice. Period, full stop. Creativity is my spiritual practice. So I'm gonna dive into this and explain it a little more in depth. So in order to fully describe what this means with this idea of creativity being a spiritual practice, let's start by defining spirituality. And we're going to go really broad here, you guys. Spirituality is the belief that something bigger than you drives the bus. Right? It's pretty simple. Something bigger than you drives the bus. Some people call this God. Some people call this Buddha. Some people call this highest self, source, Jesus, mindfulness, consciousness. There's so many names. You can call it whatever you want. We're going to keep it very simple, very bare bones. That spirituality is the belief that something bigger than you drives the bus. My husband likes to say something, how does he say it? My husband says, there is a God and it's not you. That's his definition of spirituality, and I totally love that as well. Anyway, there's a lot of ways you can describe it, but I think everybody knows what I mean when I say spirituality is the belief that something bigger than you drives the bus. It's the belief that you are part of something bigger than yourself, that it's not just you, this little tiny human being, and the world is much bigger than what you see with your eyes, smell with your nose, and taste with your mouth, that there's so much more out there. So that's my definition of spirituality. And I've mentioned before that I was raised in a household, I would almost call it anti-religious. I didn't have any sort of spirituality or religious upbringing, and I inherited a great block around spirituality and religion from a family member, which I did talk about in episode 20 if you want to go back and hear about that. But I didn't have any spirituality. I didn't have any belief in something bigger than me. I didn't have that belief for many, many years in my life. And it was very much my creativity that led me to this realization that it's not just me kicking around on this rock, doing my thing, and I'm certainly not in control, but I thought I was for a really long time. And it really started when I realized that the characters I was working with were real. It's when I started realizing that I was a medium and that there were these ghosts and these spirits around me, and they were channeling through me and working through me and expressing themselves on the page. And I mean, what a way to realize there's a lot more out there, right? And to, come in contact with these spirits. And that's very much what happened. And they catapulted me on this path of spiritual growth. And this is the other thing that I want to define is spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is any sort of practice or personal work that a person does to increase connectivity to your higher power. That can be prayer, that can be a mantra, that can be going to church. For me, it's channeling. For me, it's being outside and talking to nature. There's all sorts of ways to increase your connectivity to source, but that is spiritual growth. And my creativity 100% is inextricably woven with my spiritual growth. So creativity led me to this discovery that there was such a thing as spirituality, that there was a greater power out there. And as I've jumped into the rabbit hole head first down this, my creativity has led me on so many different paths of spiritual growth. Every book, I grow with every book, every character, every story. They all help me grow and expand my connection to source and spirit every day, every time I sit down at the computer. We're going to take a brief pause from our show. I am a working author and I produce this show on my own out of a love and passion for my craft. And if you would like to support me, I would greatly appreciate it if you would check out my books on Amazon. You can find me under Camille Picott on Amazon. My books are available in ebook, they're available in print, and they're also in Kindle Unlimited. So if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, you can read my books for free. And I would appreciate anyone that would leave a review or share the titles with friends that you think would enjoy them. I also have most of my books available as audiobooks, and they're available on all major audiobook platforms, including Audible and even in libraries. So you can get them for free with a library membership. And the last way you can support me is by joining my monthly Patreon team. I have two membership tiers at $1 a month and $5 a month. And the $5 tier gets access to me once a month. We have live chats where you can come in and chat with me in person and ask me any questions about my books and writing. And for everyone that joins at $1 a month, you go into the acknowledgement section of all of my books when I publish them. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and let's get back to the show. So when I say that creativity is my spiritual practice, what I mean is that creativity helps me grow and expand my connectivity to my higher power. And I describe that as the universe, spirit guides, source. I think you guys have heard me use all those words on this podcast. And I'm going to tell you a story to illustrate exactly what I mean. And the story that I'm going to share with you it's very indicative of what happens every time I write a new book. So it's not unusual in my practice, but I picked this one. It's near and dear to my heart, and it happened very early on at the beginning of my spiritual awakening. And this is the story of Jessica. Some of my readers have heard this story, especially the ones in my Patreon group. And Jessica is one of the main characters in the fourth book of my Undead Ultra series. And she was not the first spirit that I was aware of working with, but one of the first ones. And I would say that the experience of working with her is probably the closest experience that I've had to being haunted. And when I use the word haunted, I don't mean it in the way that I was ever afraid of my life, afraid for my life or my safety. There was never anything like weird happening that you see in the movies, like plates weren't flying across the room. I didn't have an angry ghost banging on windows or anything like that. I was never afraid or frightened for my safety. However, I was fearful of what Jessica wanted to bring to my story. So that's the story that I'm telling you now. So when she came forward to be a part of this book, I thought she was just a benign housewife who had lost her husband and her children in the apocalypse. That's kind of how she presented herself. Sometimes they do this, like they trick me. They show me this like the fluffy side, and then once they get their hooks in, then like the gloves come out. So that's kind of what happened in this instance. And what happened was I'd be working on the book and rape would come out on my fingertips. All of a sudden I'd be writing this scene. I was like, what is happening here? Like, I didn't agree to this. Why is there a rape scene in here? And I delete it. And it happened 2 or 3 times. And I was like, okay, like I'm not doing this. Rape was one of those things that was very much, I had decided that it was very much off limits. It wasn't something that I was going to participate in my books. And so I just deleted it every time it came out. And then what happened is when I didn't agree to write it, she would show them to me. And they were very graphic, very graphic. Definitely not the door closed kind of rape scene, very graphic. And so then I'd get even more wigged out and upset and dig my heels in even more. And I started to see her everywhere. She would show herself to me as this really, I describe it as a deranged clown. I don't know how else to describe it, but she had on really heavy, dark, smeared makeup. She had crazy blonde hair, like just teased to high hell, crazy. She wore this really tight cream and black corset with like a little tutu thing. And she would show up and she'd be so mad, like so mad. And she'd scream and she'd rage and she'd break things and she'd set things on fire. And she'd show me all these things. And it was a lot. So when I talk about being haunted, like, yeah, it was a lot, like to see all this and I'm so emotionally open that I would feel it all too. So I would cry because she'd be so angry. And when she'd really come in is when I'd go for long runs. I was training for something, I don't even remember, but I was training for some kind of ultra marathon at the time. And I'd go out, to run for a few hours and there she'd be. So she'd hang out for hours and show me just how much anger and rage that she had within her. And I'd run and I'd cry and she'd do her thing. And tennis was a big thing. I don't entirely know everything about the significance of tennis, but she had this tennis racket that was a flamethrower and she'd burn things with her tennis racket flamethrower, and yeah, just rage and scream. And here's me over here saying, I just want to write a zombie book. I just want to write a zombie book. Why do I have to do this? I don't want to write a rape scene. And I went one day in the middle of all of this, I ended up signing up for a psychic circle. And if you don't know what that is, it's usually led by a main psychic, and they connect with spirit and they deliver messages to different people that are in the circle, and you never know if a message is going to come through for you or not. And I signed up for this circle, and as soon as it started and the psychic made her connection with source, she looked out and said, is there a Camille out here? And I'm like, yeah. Here I am. And she said, there is something that you're supposed to be writing and you're not. And oh my God, you guys. Of course I knew what it was. I was in denial about it for like maybe 60 seconds, and then I was just like, oh God, it's Jessica. Yes, she's making sure that I know that she's there. And that was kind of the watershed moment for me. After that happened, I was like, okay, I can't deny what's happening. I can't deny the fact that she's there. I can't deny that she's showing me these scenes. I can't deny that for some reason, this is incredibly important for whatever reason. And so much of spirituality is this surrender to higher power. It's this surrender to the universe, surrender and trust that you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And so I had to do that. I had to let go. I had to free fall. And I wrote several horribly graphic scenes that scared the pants out of me. A big part of my fear was I thought my readers would hate me for writing it. And I have to tell you, the book's been out a couple of years now. I haven't received like one piece of hate mail about it. I guess I was afraid of alienating readers. It was so dark. Anyway, I had a lot of fears around it. I think I've covered that. So anyway, I finally wrote it. It took days. I could only like plug away at it a little bit at a time, but I just started and I plugged away and I finally finished. And the night that I finished, it was very late. Everybody in the house was asleep. I was sitting by myself in the dining room. And I finished, and it's like this big sigh of relief. It's like, okay, I did it. This powerful energy wanted to come through me, and I let it. Okay, I did it. And as soon as I finished and I closed my keyboard, there was Jessica, and she transformed in front of me. She transformed from this deranged clown that had been following me around for weeks and screaming and burning things down. She transformed into this beautiful little girl, like maybe a year and a half, when they're still pudgy. They're still pudgy and squishy and so cute. And she wore a little white dress, little white shoes, and she had little curly hair, and she was just running around, and she was laughing. And I looked at her, and I understood. Sometimes when I'm connected with spirit, I get these huge downloads, and I'll all of a sudden receive, it's almost like getting a gift basket full of information. And in that moment, I got that information, and I understood that the reason the scene had to be so graphic rather than like a behind the door closed rape scene was because Jessica was a victim of sexual assault, and she just needed to be witnessed. That was what her spirit needed, was to be witnessed, because so many victims of sexual assault, they're never witnessed. This thing that's done to them stays in the shadows, and they never get acknowledged as the victims that they are. And that's what Jessica needed. That's what her spirit needed, to find rest and to find peace. And by trusting this energy that it showed up to work with me, by trusting the universe, I was able to bring in this healing. By working with her, I was able to help bring this healing to Jessica. And it was a very, very profound moment for me. And so when I say that creativity is my spiritual practice, this is what I'm talking about, because this understanding came, and I understood the importance of this trust to the universe, this trust to source, to God. I understood how important it was, because if I hadn't had that trust, or if I should say if I hadn't found the trust, because obviously I didn't have it to begin with because I was fighting it tooth and nail, if I hadn't found that trust and surrendered, I wouldn't have been sitting there in the middle of the night looking at the spirit of this beautiful little girl that had been freed of this shadow that had held her chained for who knows how long. Don't know. And it was the realization that my creativity was so much bigger than just me, that it wasn't just about me and my connection to my spirituality and to source, it just expanded, right? Because your spirituality, I think of it almost as like a road, that, road between you and source, or you and your higher power. And when you participate in spiritual growth, when you do things that help you expand your spirituality and connectivity, each time you do that, your road gets a little bit wider, right? Your spiritual highway gets a little bit wider. Your connection gets a little bit stronger, a little bit bigger. And so this is an example of my creativity leading to spiritual growth. And about, I'd say it was a year and a half, 2 years later, I was doing a type of meditation called a safe space meditation. And in the meditation, my grandmother stepped forward and she took me to this pasture with horses, and there was a horse corral. And I was kind of confused at first because when I looked in the corral, I recognized the spirit of little Jessica, the little girl in the white dress with the curly white hair. And I was like, well, that's weird. Why is Grandma taking me to this horse pasture? And why is little Jessica running around? And then when I looked up, I saw big Jessica, and she was no longer dressed as a deranged clown. She looked like a regular, beautiful, free woman, and she was riding a galloping horse, and she was happy, and she was free. And I understood. My grandma was taking me to this safe space where Jessica was now, wherever her spirit went, to a place that was safe. And it was such a beautiful moment. Again, this was like quite a while after I published the book, but it was just this beautiful affirmation of the work that I do for the universe, with the universe. It was a beautiful affirmation of my spirituality, of my practice. It strengthened my trust, and there's so much that's asked of me in my writing that I don't understand, but I have this faith that it's there for a reason, even if I don't understand it. And it's okay. Sometimes I get glimpses for the why, like in this case, in this story that I'm sharing with you. Other times I never know, and that's okay, because that's spirituality, right? It's faith, it's trust, it's mystery. It's the free fall into the unknown. It's the embracing of the unknown. And this experience that I'm describing to you with Jessica and me having to step into fear and moving into a space of discomfort and growth, every single book does this to me. Every single book. All these different characters that I work with, that I channel, they all push me. They all push me to grow. They all make me deal with discomfort and fear in some aspect. They ask me to be brave every single day, and every time the experience is a little bit different. Every time I learn different lessons. Every time, because it's a two-way street. The universe works for you, and you work for the universe. But it's a two-way street, So when you're being the agent of the universe and honoring these energies that want to come through you, you get to reap the reward. You get the healing and the growth. So it's definitely a two-way street. But every book, my spiritual highway gets a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, a little bit stronger. And it's beautiful. And I don't ever want to stop growing. I don't ever want to stop expanding. And this is why I've decided to start talking about creativity as a spiritual practice, because for me, that's exactly what it is. That yes, I am a writer, I'm a creative being, but I'm also a spiritual being, and I'm on a spiritual quest as much as anything that I'm doing. It's very much part of the reason why I'm here in this time and in this space as a human being. And I want to put it out there to other artists out there that maybe this is an option for you. Maybe your creativity can be a spiritual path for you as well. And I know it's not going to be for everybody. That's okay. There's so many different modalities out there. We can all find whatever feels good for us, because if it feels good for you, then you know you're in the right spot. For me, my creativity feels so good. Always, always. Even when I'm scared shitless. Even when I'm mad. Even when I have to bring in a goat orgy and I'm freaked out. There is an episode on the goat orgy. I think it's, 21 or 22. So anyway, go look that one up too. That's funny. So yes, this is what we're going to be doing on this podcast. So I am going to still be talking about writing and the creative process, but I'm also going to be talking about spirituality. And when I bring on guests, I want to talk to them about it, ask if their creativity has anything to do with their spirituality, because maybe it won't for other artists out there. I don't know. So I'm curious to find out how other artists, how their work flows, and if it is a part of their practice. And I might have spiritual practitioners on here. I don't know where it's going to go, but I do know that I'm going to be addressing the full equation of intuitive writer, which is the intersection of creativity and spirituality. And I'm so excited, you guys. I'm so excited to explore this and crack it open and talk about it and dig into it with you guys. It lights me up, and I hope it lights you up too. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of this space. And I am on social media. I have a Facebook account now. Oh my goodness. So Facebook and Instagram, I have the same handle in both places, at Write with Intuition. And okay, I know I've been talking about this intuitive writer activation course. I've been talking about it a lot. And I was planning to release it like in February or March, but the universe told me to stop and put the brakes on. So I did. And I think the reason that happened was because Jesus Christ Zombie Killer was so incredibly urgent. And now that the podcast is resurfacing and it's communicating with me again, I'm understanding that this spiritual component is also going to be a part of the course. And so that's why I had to pause, because I had to bring it in. So when I go back to make the revisions, I'm making it through this broader lens, not such a narrow, focused lens on just the writing, but we're also going to be touching on the spirituality part as well. So if you're interested in that, please join my newsletter. There's also a link in the show notes. And yeah, I will be back soon, and I'm excited to see where this is going to go. I'm in trust and surrender, and I'm free falling, and I know the universe is going to bring me exactly whatever it is I need to share with you guys. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'm wishing you a beautiful journey with your creativity, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.